I was very interested in biology, which started me birds and bird behavior. So lucky to travel to the Arctic to study nomadic birds. So I studied bird behavior, became very interested in environmental concerns. So I pursued that through biology. Biologists and ecologists are very good at observing the environment, understanding ecosystem complexity and problems. What I saw, however, is that engineers are swift finding solutions and implementing solutions. As a result of that observation, I switched from biology, which focused on complexity and understanding the natural world, to engineering towards finding solutions.
Okay.
Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers, because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button, and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and working on a product to help people overcome these problems, because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up, and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
Go above and beyond.
they become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%.
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
With Richard Jacobs.
This is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. I have Miriam Diamond. She's a professor in the Department of Earth Sciences and School of the Environment at University of Toronto. We're going to talk about chemical contaminants in the environment. So Miriam, thanks for coming.
Richard, thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, no problem. Yeah. Well, tell me a bit about your background. How did you get into this field? And, then we'll talk about your current research.
Sure. Well, I've always been interested in the environment. I have taken a circuitous route, however. I was very interested in biology, which started me birds and bird behavior. So lucky to travel to the Arctic to study nomadic birds. So I studied bird behavior, became very interested in environmental concerns. So I pursued that through biology. Biologists and ecologists are very good at observing the environment, understanding ecosystem complexity and problems. What I saw, however, is that engineers are swift finding solutions and implementing solutions. As a result of that observation, I switched from biology, which focused on complexity and understanding the natural world, to engineering towards finding solutions.
Okay. Interesting. What's your current research about right now?
I look at chemical contaminants. I'm interested in contaminants that are in all of us, that are in every creature that's alive all around the world. I look at particular sets of contaminants like flame retardants, plasticizers, forever chemicals. And I'm interested in discovering their sources, how they move through the environment, how they get into animals, how they get into us. And then I leave it for the health people to figure out the health effects. I'm also very interested in chemicals management.
Well, I guess one problem is there's hundreds of thousands of different chemicals that, and maybe a few of them have been looked at and characterized for their health effects, but the combination of them, and again, the prevalence of just so many different types, how does anyone get a handle on what's good, what's bad, what's affecting what?
Oh, that's a great question. What you've said is so true. We know a lot about so few chemicals. We tend to be looking under the lamppost for our keys, that story about the person searching for their lost keys under the lamppost because the lamppost is where the ground is illuminated. So it's really tricky to go beyond the lamppost. However, there's a lot that we can learn under the lamppost that has not been looked at, or just on the edges of the area that's illuminated. So our work has really been tracing the sources through to exposure, and there's so much to be learned about that. The research started, and my research started outside. People were fascinated by what chemicals were being discovered in the Arctic. That's really important because you would think that the Arctic is a pristine location, or at least you would have thought so decades ago. In fact, we were finding way too many chemical contaminants that had traveled there from industrialized, populated locations. But we had to figure out what the sources and transport pathways were. Then, armed with that information, how we could control the pollution sources. Also early on, we were looking at smokestacks. What I mean by that, because I mean it also figuratively, super high emitting industries or locations. But then we started realizing that chemical sources were everywhere, including inside our homes, that were causing us to be exposed. So we transitioned our research from outdoors actually to indoors.
Okay. So what indoor environments do you look at now? Like people's homes or
My house.
businesses? Or...
Yeah, I mean, people's homes. The other reason why I transitioned my research is because several decades ago, well, maybe more than that, I became a mom. And becoming a parent really changes your outlook. Before you're a parent, you think, wow, what's going on when I'm, out there in that environment or with all sorts of other people. And then when you become a parent, you say, wow, what's happening with my kids? How are my kids how are my kids being exposed in the sandbox in which they're playing? Exposed by the toys that are going into their mouths.
Yep. So what are you doing, like anthropological analyses, like going to people's homes and sampling for contaminants, or have you used your home as a test bed, or like?
Oh, we have used my home as my home has been used many times as a test bed. Absolutely. And many researchers have used their homes. Yes, I could tell you some of the chemical profiles in my house.
Yeah, what have you found that was really interesting to you or like horrifying?
Yeah. Well, we found that my house, which is really old, my house is well over 100 years old. And yet we found chemicals that shouldn't have been here. For example, chemicals that were used in dielectric fluids and transformers, and also in certain building materials. Those chemicals were discontinued from use in the early 1970s. Yeah, they showed up in my house. They weren't used when the house was constructed. They weren't used after our house was renovated, and yet they showed up in our house. So that was puzzling.
Where do you think they came from? Have you been able to identify that?
No.
Okay.
But I know that they're in every house, unfortunately. They're in every house because the chemicals were used so ubiquitously that they're just smeared over the entire environment. So what our research has found is that chemicals used way in the past, if they're persistent, will continue to be here today. Our home environments allow for chemicals to linger for decades after they have been used. Some research that we'll be publishing shortly, for example, shows that DDT, a pesticide that was banned decades ago, is still found in people's homes. The indoor environment preserves that chemical signature. It preserves the presence of those chemicals. Well, that's very disturbing because we use so many different chemicals in our homes.
Well, so you found DDT, but did you find a lot of it, a little bit of it, or does it have such a low threshold for sickness or death that, any amount's terrible?
We found a range of levels at levels high enough that they could be of concern for infants or toddlers that would be exposed through dust, for example, on the floor.
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
Okay, well, what about the rooms of your home? Were there any rooms that were more contaminated than others? Any surprises there?
No surprises there, but I can report from the literature, for example, that if you happen to break a mercury thermometer, most of us don't have mercury thermometers, but if you do and you break it, mercury will last in that room and then will emanate throughout the home and again linger for a very, very long time. So chemicals don't stay in a particular room. They move from room to room, and the types of chemicals we look at, such as forever chemicals, PFAS, flame retardants, pesticides, they don't stay put. They just keep moving.
Did you do like a body burden test on yourself or other occupants of your home and try to correlate that with the chemicals you see to see if there was if you were seeing the same thing or if it was different?
Yes, we have done some work like that. For example, I found that my body burden of one of the chemicals used in fragrances shot way up after I lit a fragrance candle and I applied nail polish. Not sure which one of those was the source. The spike in concentrations was astonishing. Yeah, I would use that word, astonishing. We've also looked at a relationship between chemicals in people's phones, their hands, and their cell phones. So cell phones are really interesting. When was the last time you washed your cell phone?
Yeah, sometimes they get clean, but not too often.
Indeed. That's the case for most people. Not too often. So what's happening then is that your hands touch a whole bunch of different things that pick up chemicals, some chemicals that are not so good for you. You transfer them to your cell phone, which acts as a repository of those chemicals. So even after you wash your hands, you can reintroduce those chemicals to your hands after you can use your cell phone. Cell phones are a great archive of what you've been exposed to, and also a terrific means of transferring chemicals even after you've washed your hands.
Okay. So I don't know, what do people do about this now that you've characterized what's going on in your home? Have you taken any actions to see if you can reduce certain chemicals in the house, ventilate it more, wipe down the walls? Were there hot spots in your house that you took action to change the composition of the chemicals there, the amount?
So there are different actions that everyone can take. Yes, increasing ventilation reduces indoor air levels, but we do have to balance that with energy conservation. Many of us heat and cool our homes using fossil fuels. I don't want to be promoting actions that increase greenhouse gas emissions, which in turn contribute to climate change. So these are really tricky issues, but we do know that ventilation works. So, for example, after you paint your house, use certain glues, use particular building materials. Yes, please, or apply pesticides. Yes, please do ventilate your house well. Ventilation does reduce chemical concentrations. Please do remove the dust. Wet mopping is the best thing to do. It does reduce chemical contamination. Moreover, it reduces opportunities for little kids and pets also to be exposed. So those are practical things that you can do. Then there are bigger societal things that everyone can contribute to. And that is being politically active, looking for representatives who speak to environmental protection, that speak to sound chemicals management. I think that's really important. There are many organizations that work towards sound chemical management. I support those organizations and try to promote their work. I myself have become very involved in chemical management activities. I've worked on chemicals management activities at the national scale and now going international. So those are activities that I believe contribute to and make a difference, not just for myself and my family, but for next generations. I really want to use my expertise to help with chemicals management so that everybody can live in a safer world.
What does chemicals management mean? What does that mean for an individual?
What it means is looking at which chemicals should be removed from the marketplace, making sure that nasty or regrettable alternatives are not put onto the marketplace. It means ensuring that chemicals and waste are managed soundly. For example, that persistent chemicals are not just put in landfills where they'll just go all over the place, but rather that they have to be managed according to hazardous chemical handling procedures. Chemicals management means that we don't ship our waste from high-income to low-income countries. That happens like it's happening right now, today. So it means looking after what we do with our chemicals. It means being aware that we're offshoring production of many of our chemicals so that, for example, other countries are bearing the burden of chemical contamination, whereas wealthy countries don't. So there's so many different aspects to chemicals management that we need to be aware of and work towards.
Are there any particular scientific questions that you're looking at in terms of specific chemicals, or are you doing like more holistic overall approach?
We're looking right now at PFAS, which stands PFAS. That stands for per and polyfluorinated alkyl substances. Many people will know those substances through their use in Teflon, Gore-Tex, water and stain repellent products. These have been termed the forever chemicals. We're really concerned because their use is proliferating in so many different applications that are unnecessary. That's regrettable. It's regrettable because these chemicals don't go away. We don't even know how long these chemicals are going to last. They're really difficult to remove from drinking water. The point is, we need to dramatically reduce our use of these chemicals because we can't get rid of them, and it's really hard to treat our drinking water to remove them. Some of our studies have shown that these chemicals are prevalent in certain cosmetics that are marketed for being long-lasting, for being, hey, put it on now and let it last for 24 hours. It's really resistant to water. So this is not where we should be using incredibly long-lasting chemicals. We don't need these chemicals in cosmetics. We've also completed a study on the use of these chemicals in kids' products. These forever chemicals are used in everything from school uniforms to some kids' swimwear. So they should not be used in these products. Again, the use of these chemicals in such products offers an excellent opportunity for kids' exposure to these forever chemicals, and the use of these chemicals in today's products will contaminate the drinking water of the next generations. So we're working hard on reducing the use of these chemicals in products where they're not needed.
Okay, so what, I don't know, are there any big initiatives right now that are going to make changes in the chemicals that we're exposed to? Or is it incremental, or is it kind of whack-a-mole where you work on one and then 100 others spring up to be a problem after that? What's the landscape that would look like?
It's all of the above. Definitely whack-a-mole. So we remove one chemical and guess what? Another one comes up, and it's used because we just don't know very much about it, because it's flown under the regulatory radar. It's used because it was just, yes, we just don't know enough about it yet. So that's the whack-a-mole picture. There's work going on in national and international arenas on chemicals management. At the end of January, I'll be flying to Bangkok to participate in the first face-to-face meeting from the United Nations Environment Program of a new science policy panel that is being established to deal with chemicals, waste, and pollution. So this is a really exciting initiative. Many of your listeners have probably heard of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and a similar intergovernmental panel on biodiversity. These are large international intergovernmental panels that provide authoritative statements on the state of the science with regard to climate change and loss of biodiversity. These panels provide guidance to governments on what solutions should be undertaken. Now, a new panel is being established for chemicals, waste, and pollution that will hopefully fulfill the same role, providing these authoritative overviews of emerging and prioritized issues. Those statements are intended to guide governments on what should be dealt with first, what do we need to take action on, and what type of actions are going to be most effective.
Okay. Are you involved in any of these panels, or you're just aware of
Yeah,
them?
so as I said, I'm flying to Bangkok to take part as an observer in discussions on setting up this panel. I'm also involved as a member of the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel of the Global Environment Facility. The Global Environment Facility is a fund run under the World Bank that is tasked with helping developing countries meet obligations under, for example, the Climate Change Convention, the Biodiversity Convention, the Montreal Protocol, the Minamata Convention on Mercury. So I'm involved in that panel, and it provides the opportunity to bring the best science and advice so that money can be most effectively directed to addressing those really serious problems in developing countries.
Okay. Well, very good, Miriam. Where's the best place for people to find out more about your work and keep tabs on?
Oh, that's a great question. It should be my website, which hasn't been updated recently, but that gives me more incentive to update my website. You know, it's hard to keep on top of the science and your website at the same time. I'm smiling as I say that.
Oh, no problem. Any other places for people to find out more, or really that's the one best place?
Well, they can find out a Global Environment Facility from that website, which is www.GAF, standing for Global Environment Facility. They can find out about this new emerging science policy panel by going to the United Nations Environment Program website, which is hosting information as this panel develops. It also got the UNEP, United Nations Environment Panel website, is also providing information on negotiations on the new emerging plastics treaty, which is another great, exciting initiative being taken to try to address the unrelenting increase in plastics production and plastics pollution. So there are a whole bunch of different websites that can be consulted there's such a diversity of initiatives going on. It's just a matter of figuring out which one you want to become involved with.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, Miriam, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Richard, thank you so much for inviting me. I think I want to leave by saying that
Sure.
Looking at the issue of chemical contamination, climate change, we have so many daunting issues that confront us. What's important is that each one of us takes some steps to be involved, not to be overwhelmed by the enormity of the issues, but to know that each one of us can take some step that's important, and that moves us closer to making the world a better place. I always end by being hopeful, not just a passive hope, but a very active hope, a hope to do something to change the world, to make a better place for everybody, an equitable place, a place that next generations will thrive in.
Excellent. Well, very good. And thank you again, and I appreciate your final statement.
You're so very welcome.
If you like this podcast, Please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.